So let's go ahead and get started with these different personas and let's talk about some of them. The first person might be what we could call or put a label, if we had to put a label on them. Maybe this is the experienced and bored participant, the person who comes into the room and says, I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm not sure what I could possibly learn in this session. I'm not sure I want to change anything at this point anyway, right? So maybe there is something that you can teach me, but I don't know that I need to get any better. Or I'm really only here because my boss sent me. I'm going to kind of walk through each of these personas and I'm going to ask you just to kind of share some of your own thoughts, some of your own experiences, maybe some of the strategies that you've used in the chat. And I'm going to, so you can choose to write some things in the chat or you can choose just to soak in this information. It's really going to be up to you as we get going here. But the first thing I'd love to hear from you, if you so choose, is how can this impact the training environment, right? So we have somebody who comes in and they're kind of what we call the experienced and bored person. They've been doing this for 20 years. I'm not sure what I could possibly learn from you, or I'm not sure that I want to learn anything. I was just told to be here because my boss told me to. Yeah, and I'm starting to see some comments already. It sets a bad example. It gives negative energy, or it's an energy sucker. One of the things that this does is it can create an erosion of psychological safety. A lot of times people show up at training and they're ready to learn, and then suddenly they hear this, and it can take that away. Or maybe those feelings of being annoyed can get contagious and other people can jump in. It can distract from group activities. It can disrupt the validity of what we're presenting. Absolutely. So this is again, not necessarily a bad person. I don't think this person, any of the people who would say any of these statements, wakes up and looks at themselves in the mirror in the morning and thinks, how can I make this life hard on Brian? This is just kind of the attitude that they might show or bring with them into the room. And some of the things that might drive this behavior is that it's an experienced professional, right? They have experience or they feel like they have better things to do than sitting in your training session. Maybe they feel like this is beneath them in some way. Maybe they feel like they're already successful enough, or maybe they feel like they could or should be teaching this class. And just a reminder that none of those things that I just shared, or none of the things I'm going to share that drive other personas, really come from a malevolent point of view or intent. But it is something that we need to figure out how to engage this, because we need to be able to make sure that this is a good learning environment for everyone involved, that person as well as everyone else. And so, how do we engage this person? And I'd love if you have some thoughts or strategies that you've taken, feel free to drop those into the chat as well, because we can just kind of build a whole kind of library of ways to engage some of these personas. I'm going to kind of break this particular situation up into a few things that we might want to do, and definitely one thing that we're going to want to avoid doing when addressing this persona. So the first thing is trust your process and trust your content. If you've been asked to deliver a training session, there's a reason why you were asked to do that. And somebody who comes in and says, I have 20 years of experience, I could probably be teaching this class. Okay, they can say that, and that can really play with your mind a little bit as a facilitator. But trust your process, trust the content that you've put in there. At the same time, have some humility, right? So one of the things I like to do, and I'm doing it right here, I don't hold a monopoly on all that is wise and good. There are some really good thoughts. I'm pointing over here because this is where I'm seeing the chat come in. There's some really good thoughts in chat for this particular session. There's always good thoughts that will come from my participants, and I want the participants to share some of those things. So I don't hold a monopoly on all that is wise and good. Establish relationship with that person. Talk with them at a break, maybe. So you've been doing this for 20 years. What's been kind of the craziest thing you've seen, or whatever it might be? Just to recognize that, hey, I see you. And it's not a threat, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about where you're coming from. Maybe identify their expertise and lean on it during a session. One of the things that we want to make sure that we do not do in this situation, and it's very tempting, I know that when I feel challenged, sometimes I'm tempted to do this, but this is a do not do at any cost, is try to prove that you know more than them, right? Because then it becomes a me versus that person type of thing. And it's very possible that I don't know more than them. Right. So there's a reason why I'm doing this training session. And at the same time, that doesn't mean that I have more experience than anybody else who's ever covered this topic. So we do need to make sure that we don't turn this into an us versus them type of thing. I love what some of the things that people have written in the chat have to say as well. I'm going to keep moving on, but please do, as you're taking notes here, I certainly have lots to share, but we are seeing some top-notch suggestions here in the chat as well. The second persona is what I call the extrovert. Now, this is the person, and an extrovert can mean lots of different things to lots of different people. A lot of times, the classic definition of extrovert is that just get energy being around people. Now, in this particular persona, I'm going to describe this as it's the first person to offer a response to your questions. I saw earlier when I was talking about what are some of the most challenging people you've faced. One person said, the person who thinks they're the only person in the room, right? So the first person to offer a response to your questions, they have something to add to every point that you make. They have something to add to other people's thoughts, right? They take over small group discussions, and when you get that kind of person in here, I'm kind of curious in terms of when you've been in front of that type of person before. Um, I'm just reading the chat, and I love the sense of humor that a lot of people bring to these sessions. But when you get into a training environment where you have the extrovert, what is the impact that it could have on your training environment when you have one person who's the first person to respond, always adding to your points or other people's points? Um, yeah, so we're already getting into some strategies. Assign them a role, absolutely. Other people don't answer or share their points of view. Others can withdraw, absolutely. Others can check out. I know that when I'm in a session as a learner and somebody else is offering all their responses, I'm like, "Ooh, this is great. I can just sit back, right?" And so I don't have to be as present. Others don't feel comfortable speaking. That could happen too. Some other things that we have is narrative hijacking, right? So if one person is offering all the thoughts and sharing all the anecdotes, we could spend 20 minutes on that anecdote before we can get back to the topic. Or others, something else, people get annoyed, share one more point and then ask if others have ideas. So we have some strategies in here. Something else that happens here is that when you toss out a question so it's not even raising hands, somebody just shouts out the answer every time. Other people don't even have time to process, even if they wanted to answer, because suddenly when somebody has a thought or answer that comes out, it disrupts that processing ability, and that person might also hijack some small group discussion. So I see some people raising their hands saying, "I'm guilty of this." I remember when my grad school program when I had a class on training and facilitation, I was the worst at this. This was me, and I could see how annoyed my professor would get sometimes. But I just had a lot to say. It didn't make me a bad person, but hopefully everybody else could have appreciated my contributions as well. But I do know that other people needed to also be engaged here. So what might drive this behavior? It's an experienced professional. They're excited about this topic, they feel they're good with this topic and they have lots of share, or maybe even they feel there's a better way to talk about this topic, right? It comes from a good place. I think I hear what he's saying, but there's a better way to talk about this. Or maybe they feel like there's more to this topic than is being said by you or others in the room. And that could very well be true. I know that for me, a lot of times I stuff a lot in and I need to keep moving. And so I don't get to talk about every single thing about the topic, but that's not the purpose of the session also. So we do need to keep that in mind. How do we engage this? We can acknowledge this, thank you for the contribution, and pivot, right? Go right back to what we're saying. Or and I see there's some really great thoughts in here already in terms of how you might address this. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll say, okay, thank you, Brian. And does anybody else have any thoughts? So let's hear from somebody else. Sometimes it's helpful to pause, even if we have a series of large group discussions or questions to pause that to toss that to large group. When we see this, it is okay to pivot our strategy. And sometimes we might want to just say, all right, before I get an answer for this next question, what I want people to do is to think about this question first. I don't want to hear any thoughts or answers. I want you to think about this first. Then what I would like you to do is just turn to the person next to you and share, right? So this stops this allows people time to process, and stops one person from dominating the entire group. Or, sometimes it's just helpful to physically fix your gaze. If we have the person who's always answering over here, sometimes I will look over here after my question, even if that person has their hand up, and I'll say, does anybody have any thoughts? Anybody at all, right? And sometimes that gets a chuckle. That person who always has their hand up gets kind of the point sometimes. And then there's always the parking lot opportunity as well. And so, especially if somebody has a lot to say or wanted to expand upon it, you know what? I hear what you're saying. If you could write that topic down, put it up on the parking lot, we'll come back to it coming out of a break or during a break or something. But we do need to move on. All right. Yes, the story wall. Absolutely. All right. So let's go on to persona number three, the sociable participants. And this is the kind of persona where we might get people who engage in side conversations while you're speaking. They engage in side conversations during small group discussions. Um, I'm just gonna send a quick message, then I'll put my phone away. Seriously, just one more message. So these are the folks that like to engage with other people as well as you and as the facilitator. And so when we talk about this kind of participant, I'd love to hear any thoughts that you have here in terms of how this can impact the training environment. I know that for me as a facilitator, it can be distracting. As a learner, it can be distracting. It can be annoying. I love what Tracy had to say here in terms of setting expectations and boundaries early on, and I think it's a good rule of thumb for all of these. Absolutely. It's rude, right? So some people kind of see this as it is just rude. Having working agreements to start is a really good strategy. In terms of what could drive this behavior, oh, I'm sorry. Some of the other things that this could do to impact the learning environment, it is distracting. It also can be contagious, right? Any of these behaviors can become contagious if we don't address it. And so this can give permission to others to engage in this kind of behavior. Or, it leads to multitasking. I can multitask. I can listen to what you're saying and also send an email. And the truth is that you can't. The brain can't handle two attention requiring activities at the same time. I can either focus on this email that I'm sending to my boss, or I can focus on this new topic that I'm learning. I can't do both. And so when people try to use that excuse as multitasking, it actually physiologically does not work. So some things that could drive this behavior. And I love some of these strategies here. We'll talk about this in just a second, but some things that could drive this behavior is that the participants are friends. Maybe they have lots of non-training thoughts on their mind. Maybe they feel like they know the answers, but they're not confident enough to share in the large group. So sometimes the side conversations that are happening are on topic, but it's just somebody who doesn't necessarily have enough confidence to speak up in a large group, so they kind of whisper it to the neighbors or whatever. Or maybe sometimes it's somebody who has a question about the topic, but they're not willing to share it in the large group because they don't want to ask a dumb question. So sometimes that's what's happening too. So sometimes those side conversations can be social. Sometimes they're on topic, and we just need to be aware of what's happening here. We always have we have some really good thoughts here already in the chat in terms of how we might engage this kind of persona, and I just kind of want to give a rule of thumb when trying to do this. And I think that that some other folks have mentioned this also in the chat, but the overall goal here is to make sure that we can connect with the participants without creating any sort of hostile student-teacher dynamic, right? We've all been there in grade school where we've been caught talking to the person who's sitting next to us. We don't want that feeling with a bunch of adults in a room. So if we can, let's try to avoid again, the us versus them. I'm the authority figure. I love what people have put in here already in terms of using the group agreements to start. I know that I'm really guilty that a lot of times when especially a shorter session, an hour session, 2 hour session, I don't usually do group agreements. And so I'll skip that step and then I will regret it instantly when people are chatting because this is something that can come up when you're establishing group agreements. I see that somebody mentioned this next comment as well. This idea of proximity control. So if some people are talking, sometimes it's effective just to continue your message while you meander over to where this group might be talking, right? And that almost always will stop them from talking, at least in the moment, because they notice that you've noticed what's happening. Sometimes it's helpful just to stop mid-sentence, right? So if and let the conversation that's happening be the loudest conversations happening in the room, and when people find that out, that they can self apologize or they have some self awareness and apologize for it as well, knowing that they're busted. And then there's a couple other thoughts here. Directly address it during maybe a small group conversation. So while you have people doing small group conversations all over the room, address it with the participants that seem to be having the side conversations. Again, not necessarily in the large room, because if we can avoid making it an us versus them type of dynamic, that's more ideal. Or listening to the table group conversations and maybe monitor. Maybe those conversations are on topic, so monitor for questions that aren't being asked in a large group. And then just a reminder, devices can be used during breaks, during lunch. If I recognize that life doesn't stop when we're in a training session. So if you do have an email that you have to send or a phone call that you have to make, feel free to step out of the room and do that, and then come on back so you can be present. One more persona, and then we're going to start to navigate some interactive case studies here that involve these personas. This last one, the quiet observer. So this is the type of person who doesn't offer thoughts in a large group. Maybe they sit silently in the small group discussions as well, or they'll step out during small group discussions. So some questions that I have here in terms of how can oftentimes we think of the silent person as not the problem participant, but how can this impact our training environment when you think of the person that will remain silent or they don't speak up even in small groups? Or maybe if we're going to put them into small groups, they have a habit of needing to step out just when we get the small group conversations going. So how can this impact? Yes, absolutely. Angela has a comment that's it's hard, it's impossible to assess whether or not they're getting it. I'm with you, Davida. This is me as well. Rebecca says this is not me. Ask them questions directly. So one of the things, excuse me, one of the things about calling on what when I do a train the trainer session, I will always advise people to avoid calling out somebody by name. I will offer people an opportunity to do a think, compare, share, because sometimes I've had people come up to me during sessions, leadership have come up to me and said, I know that we don't have everybody, there's a few people who aren't speaking up when we have a large group debrief. And my response is oftentimes they're not speaking up in the large group, but they are participating in a small group. And so if we can structure things where there's individual reflections, if we can structure things where we can have small group conversations, sometimes that's helpful. But before I get into solutioning, let's talk just real quick about what's driving this behavior, what could be driving this behavior. So sometimes a person might feel like this training is for others, it's not for them. Sometimes they're just not comfortable speaking in front of others. Sometimes they lack confidence in their own ideas. Sometimes they just want to sit back and soak in the knowledge of others. Sometimes they're just ambivalent about the topic. So these are just some of what many of driving factors that might be behind this type of behavior. Um, but if we can allow time for processing, oftentimes that is helpful. Again, going back to this idea of, all right, let's take a moment so that everybody has a chance to process, think about it, turn to the person next to you. When you have to pair up, it is really difficult to keep your mouth shut. You're kind of a jerk if you do. So when we can put people into pairs, that's kind of my solution instead of calling somebody directly by name. Aaron, what's the answer to this? Because that can surprise somebody and it can really make them anxious. And when anxiety goes up, the ability to learn goes down. So I like to try to use strategies that don't necessarily call people out in the large group if they're not comfortable for that, but they still do like a think, pair, share. They have to pair up with somebody and actually share some answers. Or maybe it's small group conversations. Something else that could be helpful is anonymous responses. So it could be using something like Menti or Poll Everywhere, where people are polling and sharing their thoughts. It could be, all right, everybody, let's take out some sticky notes. One idea per sticky note, and let's put them up on the flip chart. So go ahead, raise your hand when you have it up there, and I'll take the sticky notes from you. Something else that could be helpful is just check in during a break. Maybe something is happening where that person is distracted from things that are happening outside of the classroom, or having activities where there are written reflections or journaling helps to make sure that everyone is engaged. All right, so. Those are four personas. Now, let's think through how we might actually apply some of these strategies. So, what I've done in this